Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Sarfo-Mensah, and we're back with another episode of IDTALK4ED Live. I'm here with a special guest, Mr. Anthony Carter, all the way out from California, and he is a career coach with experience with organizing and supporting more than 100 people who are pursuing their professional and personal goals. He's also a theatrical actor, writer, and a teacher. So he's someone that is delving into different skills, delving into different fields, just providing expertise and mentorship to young people. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. So let's welcome Mr. Anthony Carter to the show. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Kwame. Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. Likewise, likewise. So let's go ahead and get started. So
hmm
just tell us a little about yourself and what brought you into the education space, the writing space, just all the things that you're doing.
Okay. Well, I was brought up in Detroit, Michigan. So I grew up in Motown. Always loved learning. Always loved education. Went to college in the South. Went to college in Nashville, Tennessee at Fisk University. Graduated with a BA in English. And just kind of, I don't want to say floundered, but right after college, I didn't quite know which way I was going to go in terms of there were things that I enjoyed, but I had to make a living and support myself, and I was super young. Just kind of, worked different jobs, kind of bounced around from here to there. Always loved reading. Always wanted to be a writer, but was too afraid to go after it and or claim that identity for myself. Even though I majored in English and did a ton of writing in college, started working with. Ended up moving to Japan for a while. Lived in Japan for a while,
Oh,
and moved to Japan to teach. I wanted. My goal was to teach English in Japan. So that was a goal I kind of went after for a couple of years. Ended up going to Japan, lived there for 6 weeks at the foot of Mount Fuji. And I made the decision that I was either going to go to Japan and teach English or move to New York City, Manhattan, and be an artist and support myself with my art, get on the stage, support myself with the art. The Japan thing didn't work out. Stayed there for 6 weeks. That didn't work out. Moved to New York City. Moved to New York City, $300, and just a dream, just a vision of what I wanted my life to be. And started working, started hustling, and doing shows, and learning how to perform on stage, and getting a coach to learn how to sing and dance and act and tell jokes. And literally did that for 13 years
mhm.
and then moved to LA. But before I moved to, I'm sorry, Long Beach, before I moved to California, I kind of fell into teaching. It was something I was kind of always interested in because, like I said earlier, I enjoyed learning and I've always enjoyed education. And I had a partner at the time who was in education and said, well, hey, you should go do this. This is, it's good money, it's flexible, it'll work around your acting schedule, go give it a shot. And I started doing it and I just fell in love with it. And it felt like I had been doing it forever. It was one of those kind of situations where you start doing something and it was like a duck to water. It's like, okay, this is what I'm meant to do. So I started
Right.
doing that in 2005. So
Okay.
it's been 15 years. So it's been 15 years off and on. Some years it's been more consecutive than others, where I'm working a lot more. So it's been, but it's been 15 years, and I really enjoy it. I've learned a lot. I'm always willing to learn more, always reading and adding things to my tool belt, so to speak.
Well, awesome. Well, I know you like to learn a lot because you're a self-proclaimed forever student. So you have this firm belief that there's never an end to learning. You can always build your
No.
capacity with whatever
hmm
you're trying to do. So
Yeah, well,
go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree. I mean, the term we use here is lifelong learner.
Hmm.
So there's always, something to, I'm doing a class now. I'm learning how to screenwrite. I'm writing things for television. That's my ultimate goal. And that's kind of what I'm working on. So I'm learning a lot about that. And, I'm also looking into, picking up Spanish and learning, interested in taking cooking classes and learning how to cook international cuisine. So, yeah, lifelong learning is a big obsession of mine. And I also know that I just heard recently the other day that it's the only skill in the 21st century that's not going to be obsolete. You have to have the capacity to keep learning and keep adding things and, keep your mind open. That's the only thing that will allow you to thrive and do well in the 21st century.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. So now, as a writer, you have a history of writing a lot of blogs, short essays, ebooks, and reviews. So can you just share with the audience some of the main topics and issues that you write about primarily?
Sure. A lot of what I write about is being what it means to be in this culture and be black and gay and middle aged because I'll be 52 in 2 weeks. So a lot of what I write about is those three things combined with a lot of what I see in terms of how we either support young people or don't support them. So a lot of my writing goes back to what it means to have those identities and be in a culture that many times is not that necessarily welcoming. Especially if you have all those identities and you're a person who thinks and questions things that's pretty direct. A lot of people don't like that. So a lot of my writing is about how do you, I don't want to say survive, I want to say how do you thrive in a culture that many times may or may not be ready for not only you, but also your thinking and your way of looking at things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just staying on this topic, I'm pretty sure you've heard the news about the Dwayne Wade situation with his son, well now daughter.
Yes. Hmm.
And there's been a lot of controversy around that. You have some in the school of thought who believe that he's doing a great job as a dad as far as affirming his daughter and accepting her
Hmm.
for who she wants to identify as. And then there's some who believe that he's being delusional and, you know, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just kind of allowing this to happen. So, and it's been an interesting debate over the past week or so over the social media outlets. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the whole situation and how you feel the Wades are approaching it.
I think I'm really thrilled about it. I think with he and his wife Gabrielle Union, I think it's
Yes.
important that very public, successful, wealthy black individuals come
Mm-hmm.
out and say this is what we're willing to throw our support behind. I think it's extremely important because these are people that, particularly in this country, these are people that I know black people listen to, and these are people that are have the, I hate to say it, but have the platform, and have a forum to not only speak but have a forum that people will actually listen to. Because I think there's a lot. I think everybody's talking. I think there's very little listening that
Mm-hmm.
goes on in the world and in this country. So the fact that they're not only speaking, but they're actually people that people listen to, I think is super important. I think it's extremely powerful. I also think that kids are, young people, your children, grandchildren, whatever, they're going to do whatever they're going to do, right? And I don't think our job is to corral any of that or put restrictions on it. As long as they're doing something that is, hurting themselves or hurting other people, to me, I think you should, give them kudos, give them a thumbs up, and tell them to go for it. And your job as a parent or as an adult with a young person is to, be a sounding board,
Mm-hmm.
to also give them, when they're ready to hear it and when they ask for it, give them advice based, not advice, but share your experiences based on the number of years you've lived, right? So, for example, there might be something along the lines of, yeah, you can do this, but you need to understand that there are people who aren't going to like this, and there are people who are going to have a problem with you. That's their problem. That's not, you're not a problem, you're not the problem. I think it's super important to keep those things in mind.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as I was thinking about it, I keep thinking about the fact that we're in the year 2020 and you just think that our society's become so progressive. There's a lot more talk about LGBTQ plus issues. You see it
Hmm.
more throughout our media outlets. you have more representation in different industries. But yet, when you hear about controversies like these, it kind of reminds us of how homophobic our own community is, the Black community. And it's kind of interesting to me that there's been so much backlash because there's a lot of talk about the fact that she's only 12 years old and she's not at a place mentally and maturity wise to make that type of life decision. But then I think about my time as a teacher, and I've had many 12, 13-year olds know who they are. They may have
Yes.
some struggles identity wise, but they definitely know how they want to identify themselves and they're able to articulate it. So that's where I kind of challenge this notion of 12-year-olds not being able to verbalize and identify who they are, sexually. So I guess I want to just hear your thoughts about this idea of, she's 12 years old. How can she possibly know that she wants to identify as a she, and what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on that are it's always interesting to me when, how can I put this? It's always interesting to me when people identify or they claim things or do things that are considered normal. Nobody questions it, right?
Sure.
So if you are a young, let's say if you're a young male child, right, and you're 12 or you're 13 and you have all these feelings, whatever, and things around young girls. You start developing crushes, or you start developing that earlier than 12. Nobody questions that. Like nobody says, "Oh, wait and see," or "You don't know what you're talking about." But it's interesting whenever somebody does something that's outside of the norms, quote unquote, of society, and people get all up in arms. Once again, I go back to my thing would be with a young person is that once again, have a conversation with the young person, talk to them, listen. Ask them, it might even be a great idea to bring in a mental health professional.
Yes.
Not because there's something wrong, but just as an additional support network. Because I totally, totally believe that anybody, particularly if you live in this culture and you're a person of color, you, at some point or another, you're going to need therapy. And it's not necessarily because you're insane or you've got a problem. It's just there's so many things like this, like you're talking about, that assault us on a daily basis. That you need a tune-up. You need some resources. So I think for people to decide, for people to decide that this person is too young to make this decision, who don't even know the person. This is what this is what I find like both hysterical and troubling. It's like these people are making these assumptions and they don't even know this individual, and it's kind of like, wow, that's interesting. You've already decided what they should be about and you have no history with this person. You've never met them. So I think that is something that they're going to have to work out. That's something they're going to have to gather resources on, to say, yeah, this is, you're interested in this, or you're not interested in this, or why do you have these feelings, or let's talk about it. Or, maybe even bringing in somebody who, if I remember the story correctly, I think their young their child is thinking about transitioning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it might be even interesting to, to bring in somebody who's in that process or who has transitioned or who transitioned super young. I think, if I remember correctly, Janet Mock, who's a wonderful writer and she's also in the public eye, she is somebody who started that process pretty young as well.
Right.
And I would reach out to her. They have that kind of, they're all celebrities. I'd reach out to her and say, this is what's going on. Will you support us through this? There are all kinds of ways to do it without making the young person wrong.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the approach that has to be taken. And just going back to the Dwayne Wade situation, one of the things that has been mentioned through all this is the fact that this is something that should have been done privately. But then I'm thinking to myself, well, these are public figures. You have cameras following them all over the place.
Right.
Eventually, it's gonna come out. So the fact that they got ahead of that trend and decided to proactively make this announcement, I thought that was a smart move, because if they did it the other way, it probably would have been, a worse situation than it is now. But I think it's
Hmm.
just interesting that there's still so much homophobia, but also now we're looking at this notion of masculinity, and more specifically, just black masculinity.
Hmm.
These notions are being challenged, because now that Dwayne Wade is backing up his child, now all of a sudden they're questioning his sexuality, they're questioning who he is, and they're making jokes about it, which is just really childish, not fair. But it just reveals
Right.
so much about where we are as a society in terms of how we view masculinity, even with all the different initiatives that we've had. Even I think going back to maybe last year or so, there was a Gillette commercial that was focused on this notion of masculinity and what that means and how is it perceived in our society. What does that look like? What does that sound like? You have just so
Yeah.
much going
Hmm.
on, and I don't know. There's a lot to unpack for sure.
Yes, that's yes, there is. And I just have to say that, I mean, anybody who is, I think a lot of time we just need to knock it off,
Mhm.
and stop being ridiculous, and I mean, you support people, and people say one thing. You don't support them, they say something else. So a
Mhm.
lot of times you have to just, as they say, you have to kind of just do you, and then let people do whatever it is that they do. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of times we really have to just challenge ourselves not to be ridiculous.
Mhm. And I think it might be easier said than done for so many people, because they grew up being conditioned to think a certain way about what
Hmm.
masculinity looks like and sounds like. So to get to the adult age where those notions are being challenged, they're not quite sure how to reconcile these thoughts, and how to react to them. At least that's what I've seen in so many of these situations.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're living in a time where there's so many changes happening all the time, and it's going at a breakneck speed. And I think a lot of the old dogmas, the old way of doing things, I think that's being challenged on a really fundamental level.
Hmm.
So people cling to what they know. They cling to they have these ideas of what morality is and what right and wrong is. And I think, like with me, as I've gotten older, as somebody who is now in their 50s and has lived through the AIDS crisis, has lived through a number of things. When I was in college in the 80s, right when AIDS was at its,
Oh,
that was the big bad in the 80s. Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, I've lived through that, and I've gotten to a point now where I'm really not interested at all in what anybody thinks about my masculinity, or I'm not enough, or I should do this. And I think it just comes with getting older, and the fact that, like I said, I'm 52, and that's kind of what we were talking about. I think we talked before about this
Yes.
book that I put together, Ask the Old Guy, and it's all
Hmm.
about my reflections on, okay, well, what the hell are we doing here? And you get to the point where you just, I heard somebody say this a while ago, you just are no longer willing to suffer food gladly. Why would I do that? So you get older, you have some experience, you can look back. I probably have fewer years ahead of me than I have behind me. So
Hmm.
then you start looking at what's really important and what really matters. So a lot of, you're talking about the essays and the things that are right. I mean, the whole Ask the Old Guy, the book is all about, me putting together these essays about just having a look around and not willing to do certain things anymore. Not willing to, they used to say we were growing up, co-sign foolishness. It's like, why would I do that? So it's like, you have your career, you have things that you love doing, things you're passionate about, a small group of people you deeply care about and a small group that deeply cares about you, and there's really nothing else. There's really not a whole, everything else is kind of a lot of nonsense.
Now, just staying with Ask the Old Guy, your
Mm-hmm.
most recent book, does it also combat this issue of ageism in different industries? Because we're in an age
Yes.
where we have a lot of young people who feel as though they know it all and they don't need to take
Hmm.
any wisdom or advice from their elders because there's so much knowledge and information being disseminated throughout different media outlets. They feel like there's no point in asking their elders, about these different issues, or at least questioning what's being disseminated out in our airwaves.
That's that's very true. And and in the collection of essays, I do talk about that. I do talk about ageism. I talk about working. I talk about being one of the older people where I work. And most of the people I work with are in their 20s. They're in their 20s or their 30s. And I think one of the things I find that I consistently run into, and I see it like, and I don't know if it's a global phenom or whatever, but I see it like across the board. Yeah, we do have young people in general. We have just an unprecedented access to knowledge because of the internet, right? So you
Yes,
can find out a bunch of stuff. You can go on the internet, and what people don't realize, this is something I saw at a talk a while ago. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And I know that what I've been taught or what I've been reading lately is that knowledge speaks, wisdom listens. So I think we have an incredible. We don't need any more knowledge on the planet. That's not what we're not. There's not a shortage of that. There's a shortage of wisdom.
sure.
There's a shortage of people who actually can listen and say, okay, well, give me your perspective on it. And going back to what you were saying about, young people thinking they know everything. I think they know. Part of that is our fault. Like part of that is because, like I said, I'm 52, and people that I know who are in their 50s and 60s who had a big hand in raising the millennials. We brought them up to believe that, um, you do know everything. That there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? We brought them up with a lot of, I don't want to say permissiveness, but a lot of very little boundaries. I'll put it that way. Because the people that I know who are of that age don't understand. There's a understanding of when you're younger and somebody older is in the space, how do you behave? And I think
Hmm.
we've gotten away from that. It's just like I have my grandmother. I'm 52. My grandmother is 94. She's still around, right? And there's still, even if I'm in a room with her and she starts speaking, I shut up because I'm like,
Well, absolutely.
and we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from the fact that okay, here's somebody who has lived 50 or 60 years. You live 25, and I don't care what anyone says. You can't put 60 years worth of living into 25 years. You just don't. You can't. It's not possible.
Hmm.
Now, let me also quickly add that just because you're older doesn't mean you're wise either. It depends on how you use your years and
Yes.
whether or not you've done some reading, you've done some traveling, you've actually listened to people, you've had, so I don't want to get into thinking that just because somebody has been on the planet for 5 or 6 decades that they're all knowing either, you know.
Hmm.
But I was just to be, and you say, and um, there's probably a propensity that they might know more than somebody who's 25 or 30 or even 40, you know. So I think we have to really, and I don't know how to, I've been thinking about that a lot lately because people ask me things and people many times come to me with, I don't know if this is necessarily seeking knowledge. I think it's more about seeking insight about
Hmm.
what they're doing or thinking about doing. And there's a way you have to address that, and there's also a way that, there used to be, when I was younger, all of my friends were older. And there was a harshness or a bluntness to how they would address me. Where
Hmm.
now, a lot of times you say something to people, and I was talking about this the other day, but a lot of times people they'll say they're being oppressed, right, or that you're it's a microaggression. they're being oppressed. And it's like, when you go back and look at the conversation, it's like, oh, no, no, no. It wasn't about you being oppressed. It was about somebody disagreeing with you or somebody challenging your thinking. And that doesn't
Right.
mean I'm oppressing you. That just means if I say, have you thought about this? Or if I say, okay, I've seen this before,
Hmm.
and 10 of my friends have seen this, and this is the way it usually shook out, why would you think yours is, why would you think you're going to be any different?
Right.
Which
Right.
many
Right.
times people will, and I've had people say that to me, that I've had people, things have gotten back to me that people have said, oh, well, he didn't let me talk, or he was doing this, or whatever. And I was like, no, all I said was, I disagreed with, or I challenged somebody's thinking. And you used to be able to do that. And like I said, we've kind of gotten away from that now. And I think it's because we're bombarded with so much stuff on the internet.
No, I totally agree. And this question just came up. So, staying on Ask the Old Guy and just the idea of ageism, do you believe that a lot of young people resist taking advice from their elders because they feel like the elders are being too rigid? They're stuck in their old ways, quote unquote, that they don't want to take the time to consider a different perspective or their perspective. So as a result, they just decide to just do it their way because they feel like no one's going to listen to them anyway.
I think perspective is the operative word here. And I'm glad
Okay.
that you used that term. I think looking at it overall, right, and looking at it from if I stand back and take a bird's eye view of it, the
Mhm.
issue is one of the reasons, um, I think a lot of times young people don't listen to older people, and I think a lot of times older people are talking and talking and talking, not realizing that people have already tuned out. Part of the reason is that we don't live intergenerationally anymore, and I don't think that's necessarily the young person's fault or the elder's fault.
Right.
It used to be when I was growing up. I had grandparents, I had uncles and aunts who were in and out of my house. We lived near each other. So in many ways, I grew up intergenerationally. So I saw people that were 10 years older than me, 20, 30, and um, you learn different ways of communicating.
Hmm.
You learn how to be around older people and old people. Many of the people that I know, a lot of the young people that I know have never been around anybody older. And when I say older, I don't mean your parent. I mean somebody who, if you're 20, or if you're 18, right, and your parent is, let's just say that the parent is 35, right, not quite
Hmm.
40.
There you
Well, I'm
go.
20 years older than that. So I could legitimately be your grandparent, right? But if you've never been around older people, you don't know, like, there's not an understanding of how do you interact, right? How do you carry on a conversation with somebody who's 30 or 40 years older than you, you know, who may know a few things that you don't know. So I think we've gotten away from the intergenerational living and having that day-to-day exchange. So then people they don't know how to interact with each other. So the only time you ever see somebody old is on TV, you know what I mean? And they're the butt of a joke. Of course, you're not going to listen.
For sure.
Or
Right.
you see, or you watch a show. I was watching something last week, and every joke, it was a comedy. It was a sitcom, and every joke, every scene was about sexuality and people having sex. And there was nobody in this whole show who was beyond 40.
Hmm.
So then you're looking at people, you think, oh, okay, this is the only thing young people are concerned with.
Sure.
And they had a young kid in the house. I think he was 16, and his uncle, I think, was in his 40s, and they were having the same kind of issue. So if you're watching that and you think, well, gee, I mean, whether you're 16 or 40, there's no difference. There is a difference, and there should be a difference, but we
Okay.
don't see that. We don't live. People don't live near each other. They don't live with you don't have events, or you don't have graduations where you might have, your grandparent and your uncle and your aunt. And these are all people who have different perspectives. So, when you Don't grow up learning how to navigate a bunch of different, or learning how to take different things from different people's perspectives. You don't do, you kind of grow up in a vacuum. So everybody thinks and looks and acts like you. So yeah, it does make it difficult. It's not impossible to change it, but it makes it difficult.
Yeah. Do you also believe that, especially in the black community, because families are becoming younger and younger,
Hmm.
that young people don't get the opportunity to interact, as you said, with people who are 40, 50 years older than them? Because the reality is they may have a grandma who's maybe in their 40s or 50s.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like I'm 36 years old, and you know, in my years of teaching, I've had parents who are the same age or even younger than I was, and I was teaching their child. I'm an eighth grade teacher, so you do the math.
Right.
So, so of course, if you have a parent that young with a son that old, now you have another grandma or a grandparent who's probably in their 40s, 50s, and they look great. That's because they still relatively young, maybe young for a grandma or grandpa. So I always just find that interesting. And even when they interact with each other, it's not always an interaction that would suggest that it's mother and son, or father and son, or father and daughter. It seems
Hmm.
like it's two brothers or two friends talking to each other. You don't get the sense that they're parent and child. So if
Yeah,
you're
I mean,
so
I see that a lot.
yeah. So if you have this interaction going on, I can only imagine what the interaction is like with a grandparent and a child.
Right. Well, and it's what I remind people all the time is that it's kind of like I think, and I don't know if this is an aging thing, but I
Mm-hmm.
think you get you find out that the more things change and what they stay the same, right? So some things, and you learn to live with those contradictions, right? So
Yes.
some things, yeah, things have changed. Things have changed. People are, like I say, with the internet and um, the access young people have to information, without the maturation, the emotional maturation to figure out what to do with it, right? So I think, and then we now have a society where you have access to everything all the time. It wasn't that way when I was growing up.
Sure.
So I think, as I was telling somebody the other day, I remember when at a certain point, the TV would go off. Like it's not now the TV, with cable and TV, the TV's on all the time.
Yep.
So you're bombarded with images all the time. The
Mm-hmm.
internet is 24 hours a day. So when do you ever have time to turn it off and think and turn it off and sit down with somebody and have a conversation? You don't, because
No.
everything is always you have access to everything all the time, which I think is part of the problem. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing is when you start talking about grandparents, right? Because I'm a grandparent. I have 9 grandkids, right? But what I remind people is that, okay, when my grandparents were my age, I wasn't quite a teenager yet. I was getting ready to become a teenager. But I have to remember that 50, excuse me, 30 or 40 years ago is not like 50 now.
Mm-hmm.
So the way is that, people used to get married younger, and because they were living in and around their families, you were expected at 18, 19, 20 to be married, to be raised, to running a household, to be
Sure.
working. So that you were an adult at 20. Where now, I think I know people who are 20 and 25, and to me, they're not really 20 and 25.
Mm-hmm.
They're closer to a teenager, because of the way they think, the way they do things, what they find, where their values are, and it's kind of like, that's interesting. So even when I meet people now who are 40 or 50 is not what it was when I was a kid. Like when I was a kid, 40 or 50 was old because that's what your grandparents' age was. You were a teenager or younger, and you just thought, oh, okay, this is an older person. That's changed. Where now it's kind of like there are young people that I have to check periodically where I work because I think they think we're peers. I'm like, no,
Mm-hmm.
we're not. I'm here to support you. I'm here
Yeah.
to help you get educated and achieve your goals, but we're not buddies. We don't hang out.
Right.
So
Right.
change it. I told somebody that Thursday. I was like, you need to rethink that, rethink, change your tone and rethink what you're asking because this doesn't work. So
Mm.
I think a lot, but if you've never grown up around, older people who put you in line, you don't know that. So a
Absolutely.
lot of things I think we've moved away from a lot of uh like I say, intergenerational living, community parenting,
Mm-hmm.
where you didn't act, there wasn't none of this. I'm going to do what I want to do in the street or whatever, or down the street from my house, and then go home and nobody's going to know. It's like where I grew up, everybody knew everybody. I can still remember all their names, remember who lived over here, what this person did, what high school this person went to, and it was just different, And I think we're so isolated now, you know. And you think with the internet we'd be more connected. In many ways, we're more connected, but just we're just as isolated as we are connected, which is really odd to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Because now with the internet, with social media, just because you like a post or comment on a post, they almost try to equate it to real in-person conversation.
Right,
But in reality, you're just disconnected from that person because whatever that person posts may not be their reality. They
right,
might be covering up something that a different narrative that they don't want to share with the public. But we don't know that. We can't determine that because we can only see what's posted. We don't know
right.
what's going on behind the post. So there's just a
That's
lot
true.
going on there. But as we're wrapping up, we talked about a lot of different issues, and I want to give you an opportunity to share maybe any special projects or initiatives that you're working on at the moment that you like to let our viewers know.
Okay, great. I am finishing up my first feature. So I wrote a film, and I'm doing another draft of it. We'll finish that hopefully. Well, I'm going to finish it today or tomorrow.
Awesome.
That's the one thing. If people want to read my work, they can go on my website. And my website is my name, Anthony, ANTHONY, dash Carter, C as in cat, ARTER.com. They can get, I would recommend, if people are going to the site, because of your audience, my recommendation would be to read a couple of different things. One of them is called Refusing to Return to the Closet, which is all about LGBTQ educators, so refusing
Mm-hmm.
to return to the closet. Another one is Why Male Teachers Are Good for Children. And there's another one I wrote called When Middle Class Teachers Happen to Raise Poor Students. So yeah, you can go check those out if you're into science fiction. The book I put out before Ask the Old Guy was a collection of short stories about violence in young people and how we allow violence to affect young people or don't allow it. And it's on the website as well. It's called Rules of Reality. It is a collection of science fiction, short stories, speculative fiction.
Awesome. And make sure you all go on Anthony's website. There's a lot of interesting, insightful material to read. I've had a chance to read some of the articles and just very insightful. So you have to get a chance. If you get a chance, please go out there and read some of his work. Very fascinating. But Anthony, thank you for being on the show. It's been a great
Thank
conversation.
you. Thank you.
And as for everybody else, on behalf of Mr. Anthony Carter, this is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah signing off. Wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good night. We're going to do this another time. Peace.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right.